paying it forward and repaying it, some kind of a mechanism. It has to be connected to it in order for us to be able to get you that money. I will say, as a businesswoman, this is not any way to run a state. It's really an unbelievable situation to be in. We can prioritize payments, which we do. If we can get a legal mechanism to make payments to any of the community colleges or any of the student grant grants where it's passed by the legislature and the governor, I can tell you as a comptroller, we can pull those up, we can expedite those funds out to you to help, and we will do that. We have been doing that with organizations all around the state that are really desperate for funding, but that's a very short-term fix. We really need to think about how to get out of this situation going forward. And frequently I'm asked, well, what if we just reinstated that 5% temporary tax? Wouldn't that just solve a lot of problems and get us out of this mess? I wish it were that simple, honestly. I wish that would make a big difference. If we put that tax back in place, it would bring in about $5 billion. But I mentioned early on, we're looking at, for the total year, the fiscal year, being behind somewhere between 10 and 12 billion dollars in debt. So while it would put a Band-Aid on the wound, what we really need is a tourniquet at this point. And so it would help a little, may pay some of those bills, but it really doesn't solve the problem of still being $7 or $8 billion behind in our payments. It also assumes that if we did that without doing anything else, that we would be able to keep jobs and keep businesses here and not further shrink our tax base. Honestly, to get out of the situation that we are in, without doing anything other than raising taxes, it would require us to double our current tax rate and take our income tax rate in Illinois up to somewhere between 7 and 8%. That's what would bring in enough revenue to get us out of just the current bill backlog. We're looking at not addressing any of the unfunded pension liabilities. I don't know a legislator who would vote for that, and I don't know many businesses that would stay here and continue to provide jobs if we did take the taxes up that high. So personally, I don't think that's a good solution. I think the solution that we need to look at is one that involves really getting more efficient with our state government. We have cut a lot of things to the bone that are important expenditures in the state, but we still have, I think, pretty hefty costs in our state government with respect to infrastructure and systems and things. We are working on a number of things. In my office, I cut my budget 10% last year. I turned back $1 million to taxpayers the last couple months of the fiscal year. We are working at 10% less this year than last year. We could do that throughout state agencies. We are working on a project to put in place a new statewide financial system for the state. It'll take us 5 years to get it fully rolled out, but once it is in place, and we'll actually start to see savings in fiscal 17 by the end of that year. But once it is in place, it will save our state $500 million a year. Those kind of projects help. So certainly, taking costs out and becoming more efficient is something we should do. We are going to need to raise taxes, but as I mentioned, I don't think that we can raise them enough to get out of the mess we're in. So we are going to have to look for some ways that will help our businesses. If we raise costs on one side through tax increases, give them some cost relief on the other side. Whether it's getting rid of some of the unfunded mandates that are out there in our schools, legislature, in our municipalities, whether it's, I believe, some of the reforms that the governor has asked for will be critical in giving that cost relief side that will allow us to raise some taxes, get our economy growing, and bring in enough revenue to help get us out of this mess that we're in over a longer period of time. It's a difficult solution. These are hard decisions for people who are making these decisions. And this is why we still sit here 8 months in the fiscal year without a budget in place. We have some in our state who just want to raise taxes. We have others that want to take a different route out of here. Obviously, having looked at the numbers, I think we have to take a different route. Going down the same path again will not get us out of it. We raised taxes in 2011 to 5%. We brought in $34 billion in additional revenue. When I was sworn in a year ago, we had $8 billion in revenue in the state. So we didn't use that money to pay down the bills. We need to get on a path to get ourselves out of debt. It costs us, this year it will cost us around $400 million in late fees and fines because we pay our bills so late. So I do think, however, that I'm an optimist. I think we will get out of this. I think we have seen a lot of indications that the governor and the legislature can work together on this. We saw them pass the K through 12 education bill at the beginning of the fiscal year. We saw them work together to fund local governments and 911 service and fund domestic shelters and take care of the child care payments that were not funded in last year's budget. So, and President Cullerton from the Senate and Governor Rauner, they've been working together on a pension reform option that would save our state about $1 billion a year. So there are signs that they are talking. It's a really good sign. I believe if we keep asking them to get together and work on a budget, we will get that eventually. It has to be balanced because it doesn't help to promise funding that we don't have the money to write the check for. It just adds to this backlog of debt. It makes false promises to organizations who then spend money and expect us to pay, and it costs us a lot of money because we pay our bills so late. So I just want you to know that I will be here to be a resource. I'm happy to answer any questions you have on any of the budget. This is really where we sit. This is why this is so difficult. I appreciate how hard it is for everyone, and I just try to be a continual voice for fiscal responsibility. I've been everywhere since we got into this mess after the fiscal year, talking about the need to pass a balanced budget. And I'm hoping that as we move into this end of this fiscal year and the legislature begins looking at fiscal 17, that we will get some stopgap for the end of this fiscal year and a budget that will be passed for fiscal 17 that will be a negotiated budget. The governor actually in his budget address, I don't know how many of you heard or saw what he had to say, but he really reinstated a lot of the funding for things that had been cut in the budget he asked for fiscal 16, but also asked for the legislature's help figuring out how to fund that through a series of cuts, revenue, and reforms. And that's really what we need for them to all work together to get that done.
Okay. Questions for
So I know that this largely depends on what Congress needs to do, but how long or how many years do you think it would take to finally get out of this?
So this is our legislature in the General Assembly, so it's state versus federal. If we were to raise revenue somewhere in the 5% range, 1.5%, 5%, but also put in place some reforms that will keep our businesses here and encourage them to invest, grow, put people back to work. And implement some cuts really to be more efficient in our own government. I think over a couple of years, we could actually get ourselves pretty close to being out of this existing bill back. We do have to address the unfunded pension liabilities that are out there. It is a huge amount of money. And we need pension reform that's constitutional desperately to be able to get that curve to bend down. We're in a ramp that costs us more every single year this year. It should cost our state about $1 to $2 billion a year to fund the pensions. This year it's costing us over $7 billion, over almost a quarter of our state's budget. Next year it's supposed to be $8.5 billion. So unless we get some kind of reform that will help bend that curve down and stabilize it, even a little, a couple of $1 billion would be a big help and start to work it back down to towards something that we can afford. But out of the current backlog, I think a growing economy could help us a lot, and we could look at getting out of this within a couple of years. And I'll tell you, having talked to business owners all around the state, most of them say they would be okay with a tax increase if they got some cost relief and the state had a plan to get out. The problem is we never have a plan. We address the symptom of the problem, which is lack of cash from poor decisions. We don't address the core of the problem and solve it, and this time we did solve it.
Good. Other questions?
I have three questions.
Right.
Thank you, by the way. Thank you for coming to explain it. I love this.
It helps a lot, doesn't
Yeah,
it? I
it
mean,
does.
these millions and billions, I think they're
Yes.
just funny money,
I
really.
think it's very helpful. My first question, the state budget, how large is it?
The general revenue portion of the budget, which is really the part that's being negotiated over, the revenues that were expected for this fiscal year were $32.5 billion.
Okay. And you mentioned that is this an annual number, $400 million in late fees that you are projecting to have to pay because we're not paying the bills?
Right. So it'll be roughly that. The first 6 months of the year, we have accrued an expense of $190 million, but we have more bills as we move more into the year. So I'm estimating double that plus a little, so about $400 million.
$400 million.
Yes, in late fees and fines. This is not
Late fees.
interest on debt.
Right.
This is because we pay our bills so late. After bills have been in-house for 3 months, 90 days, the state pays 1% a month.
Okay. All right. And my third question is, you mentioned that when we increased the income taxes to 5%, that period of time that we were in there, it yielded $34 billion, and it didn't solve any problems, really. My question is, did we lose any businesses? Because it appears that it wasn't a net positive.
No, it was actually a net negative.
Yes.
We sent businesses out of state.
Yes.
A lot of them up here, in Lake County have moved over the border, and again, I've been all over the state. I've been to Rockford, Quincy, Carbondale, Quad Cities. They've all seen businesses pick up and leave. We lost population. We've shrunk our tax base in the last year. So and it's because we raised costs. People say, you hear this all over, well, our tax rate isn't that high in Illinois. Even when it was 5%, it wasn't that high compared to Wisconsin. And now it's down. We didn't go fully back to 3%. We're down at 3.75% now. So it's relatively low. But our total taxes in Illinois are quite high. Our property taxes are tied with New Jersey for the highest in the country. So when you look at the total tax on businesses and on families in Illinois, and you throw the sales tax in, which is high, between 7 and 10%, if you're in Cook County. When you look at all the other fees on gas, tax, et cetera, that we pay, utility taxes, we are a very highly taxed state.
Yes. So, how would it work the second time? If you raised it 5% temporarily and it yielded $34 billion
Over 4 years.
over 4 years, and it was a net negative.
Yeah.
Net negative. How would it work the second time if to raise taxes again? What would be the offsetting piece that would be attractive for businesses to stay? Because if I'm a business owner, and I am, why would I stay?
So, and if we raised taxes again and took it to 5%, we would not bring in $34 billion because we didn't go down to 3% again. We went to 3.75. So we could expect to bring in, if we kept everything intact and did not lose businesses, we might bring in 20. It's about $5 billion a year that we would bring in if we went back up to 5% for where we are now. This is why some of the reforms that the governor is asked for, and why we're at a budget stalemate, because we have some in the legislature who do not want to approve any of these reforms. And then the governor said, look, I will agree to some tax revenue, but only if you will agree to some of these reforms for our businesses. The reforms include, and these are things that I think actually we could do that I would think we would have common ground on. There's some that are more controversial, but I believe that there are some that we ought to be able to agree on. The biggest one is workers' comp insurance reform. It costs, if you are a business in Illinois, we have extremely high insurance rates for workers' compensation. We are higher than Massachusetts, which is a pretty progressive state on a lot of those things, a liberal state. We are much higher than all the surrounding states here. And so when a business like a manufacturer that employs a lot of skilled labor And a lot of people looks at their total cost. They look at our high property taxes in Illinois. They look at what it costs them to employ people. And one